Every night, a truck drives around my apartment building, its headlights casting eerie shadows on my walls. The deep rumble of its engine is a persistent drone that haunts my dreams. I can't escape the unsettling rhythm of the vehicle as it completes its circuit around the complex with an almost deliberate precision. Each pass of its headlights sweeps across my window, transforming the darkened rooms into grotesque, shifting landscapes of distorted shapes and ominous silhouettes. At first, I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself it was just an odd local pattern, perhaps a trucker with a quirky route. But the routine became impossible to ignore. The nightly presence of the truck started to gnaw at my nerves. I found myself staring at the clock, waiting for the moment when the low rumble would begin. The noise, always in the background, grew more intrusive with each passing night, feeding my growing unease. The situation took a turn for the worse when I noticed something strange about the truck. It never seemed to stop or even slow down, just continued its loop with the same rhythmic, almost hypnotic regularity. The driver never got out, never interacted with anyone, and never even looked in the direction of the building. It was as if the truck was operating on an autopilot of its own, driven by some inscrutable purpose. Last night, after weeks of mounting dread, I decided to confront my fear head-on. The anxiety had become unbearable, and I needed answers. As the clock struck midnight and the familiar drone of the truck's engine began, I steeled myself and ventured outside. The night air was cold and damp, a heavy fog lingering near the ground, making everything seem cloaked in an eerie haze. I approached the truck, its engine idling with a deep, rhythmic hum. The vehicle was an old model, dusty and worn, its paint peeling in places. The driver's side window was partially rolled down, and the faint light from the street lamp cast a ghostly glow on the figure inside. I could barely make out the driver's face, but the hollow eyes and the shadowy form were enough to send a shiver down my spine. I tapped on the window, my knuckles brushing against the cold glass. The driver turned slowly, and I was struck by how empty his gaze seemed. He had an aura of deep, unsettling calm, his face expressionless as he stared at me. "Why do you keep driving around here every night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor in my throat. "What are you looking for?" The driver's reply came in a slow, deliberate whisper, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "I'm looking for someone who's trying to hide." The coldness of his words sent a chill through me. I tried to process what he had said, my mind racing with fear and confusion. "Who are you looking for?" I demanded, but the driver did not answer. He continued to look at me with those vacant eyes, as if he were staring through me rather than at me. "What do you mean?" I asked again, my voice rising in desperation. "Why are you searching for someone?" The driver's gaze never wavered. "You don't understand," he said softly, his tone almost pitying. "But you will." The finality in his voice made my blood run cold. Before I could react, he shifted his gaze back to the road, as if our conversation had ended. I felt a surge of panic and turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The truck's headlights followed me until I reached the door to my apartment, and even then, I felt the weight of that unblinking gaze lingering on me. Inside my apartment, I locked the door with trembling hands and retreated to my bedroom, trying to ignore the thudding of my own heart. I peered through the blinds, watching the truck continue its slow, deliberate circle around the building. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute dragging on as I waited for dawn. The following morning, the truck was gone. It had vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there. The relief I felt was overshadowed by a gnawing sense of unease. I tried to return to normal life, but the truck's nightly visits had left an indelible mark on my psyche. The rhythmic hum of its engine was replaced by an unnerving silence, and I found myself increasingly paranoid. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began to plague my apartment. Objects would be slightly out of place, and I would hear faint whispers in the dead of night. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the feeling of being watched never left me. The driver's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the mystery I couldn't unravel. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I heard a noise outside, a familiar, low rumble. My heart skipped a beat. I crept to the window and, sure enough, there was the truck, resuming its nightly circuit. I watched in horror as it completed its loop and parked once more under the street lamp. Unable to bear the tension, I decided to confront the driver again. I threw on a coat and rushed outside, my breath visible in the cold air. I approached the truck with a mix of fear and determination, and as I neared, the driver's window slowly rolled down. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What are you looking for?" The driver's eyes met mine once more, and he spoke in the same unsettling tone. "You're not who I'm looking for," he said. "But you're part of the search." Before I could respond, the truck's engine roared to life, and it began its circuit again. I watched in shock as the truck disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with my mounting fear and confusion. The nightly visits continued, each one more terrifying than the last. The sense of paranoia grew, and I started to question my own sanity. Was I truly the one being searched for, or was this all an elaborate psychological torment? As the days turned into weeks, the truck's presence became a dark, constant shadow over my life. The once familiar routine of my existence was now a nightly ordeal of dread and anticipation. The driver's cryptic messages and the truck's relentless patrol had transformed my world into a grim and haunting reality, leaving me to wonder if I would ever escape this nightmare or if I was simply a pawn in a twisted game I couldn't hope to understand. I've lived in my apartment for years, and for the most part, life had always been predictably dull. That changed abruptly about a month ago when a truck started driving in circles around my apartment complex every night. At first, I thought it was just an oddity, maybe a delivery truck with a peculiar schedule. But as the days turned into weeks, the nightly circling became more disturbing. The truck's engine was a low, persistent rumble that never seemed to stop. Each night, the vehicle would begin its rounds right around midnight, and the sound of its idling engine would seep through the walls of my apartment. The headlights cast long, unsettling shadows that danced across my windows, making my apartment feel like a stage set for a horror film. Initially, I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was probably just a routine of some new local driver. But the sight of the truck's headlights moving past my window night after night, always at the same time, was unnerving. It soon became clear that this was no ordinary pattern. The truck didn't stop or slow down, it just continued its circuit with an almost mechanical precision. The sight of it became a nightly reminder of an unsettling presence. My anxiety grew with each passing night. The truck's relentless circling was not only disturbing but also started to feel invasive. The more I thought about it, the more the situation gnawed at my peace of mind. I began to worry that there was something more sinister at play, something beyond mere coincidence. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to leave a note on the truck's windshield. My first message was simple: "Who are you? Why are you driving around here every night?" I hoped that a direct question might yield some sort of explanation. The next night, I watched from my window as the truck passed by, my heart racing with anticipation. The truck's headlights washed over my apartment, and I could see the driver pausing to retrieve the note. I held my breath as the truck continued its circuit, hoping for a response. By morning, I checked the truck again, but there was no reply. My heart sank, but I resolved to try again. I left more notes over the next few nights, each one more insistent than the last. "What do you want from me? Please stop this. Just tell me what you're looking for." But every time I checked the truck, there was no answer. The absence of a response only deepened my sense of dread. Then, one night, I found a response. My heart pounded as I retrieved a crumpled piece of paper from under the windshield wiper. I unfolded it with trembling hands, and the message scrawled in red ink sent a chill down my spine. I'm here for you. The words seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. What could it mean? I stared at the message, my mind racing. The use of red ink was particularly unsettling, as if it were a warning or a threat. I felt a surge of panic. Who was this person, and why did they claim to be here for me? Unable to sleep that night, I kept my lights off and watched from my window, waiting for the truck's next appearance. As the hours ticked by, the dread grew heavier. When the truck finally arrived, its headlights cut through the darkness like knives. I could see the driver through the window, a shadowy figure shrouded in mystery. I decided I had to confront him. As the truck parked and idled, I braved the cold night air and approached it. The rumble of the engine was deafening up close. I knocked on the driver's side window, and after a tense moment, the window slowly rolled down. The driver's face was partially obscured by shadow, but his eyes, dark and hollow, were unmistakably intense. "Why are you here?" I demanded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What do you want from me?" The driver's gaze remained fixed on me, and his voice came out as a low, unsettling whisper. "I told you," he said, "I'm here for you." My pulse quickened. "What does that mean? Why are you driving around here every night?" I asked, my voice cracking with fear. "Are you threatening me? What do you want?" The driver leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "It's not a threat. It's a promise. You'll understand soon enough." His words sent a wave of icy terror through me. The promise of understanding seemed far more ominous than a mere threat. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean by that?" I asked again, but the driver offered no further explanation. Instead, he rolled up the window and shifted the truck into gear. The engine roared to life, and the truck began its circuit once more. I stood there, paralyzed by fear, as the truck disappeared into the night. The encounter left me feeling hollow and unsettled. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened or what the driver's intentions were. The message and the driver's words had escalated the situation into something far more terrifying than I had imagined. The following days were marked by a growing sense of paranoia. I began to notice small, unsettling changes around my apartment. Objects seemed slightly out of place, and I could hear strange, almost imperceptible noises. The feeling of being watched was constant, and the sense of dread was inescapable. One evening, I heard a faint scratching at my door. My heart raced as I opened it, only to find another note with the same red ink. It read, "Are you ready?" The message was brief but chilling. Ready for what? The note only deepened my fear, leaving me to wonder about the true nature of the threat. The truck continued its nightly patrol, and each new day brought an increasing sense of anxiety and unease. The once familiar routine of my life had become a living nightmare. I felt trapped in a psychological game with no clear end in sight. As the weeks passed, the tension mounted. I found myself unable to sleep, my nights consumed by worry and fear. Each time the truck circled the complex, I braced myself for whatever might come next. The driver's cryptic messages and the truck's relentless presence had turned my world into a dark, foreboding place. The realization began to sink in, I was at the center of a twisted game, a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Each night, the truck's headlights cut through the darkness, a constant reminder of the fear that had taken hold of my life. I was left to wonder how far this disturbing game would go and what it meant to be the target of such a chilling and personal search. The sound of a truck idling outside my apartment every night has become a persistent and unsettling backdrop to my life. Its low, steady rumble has seeped into my dreams and left me in a state of constant unease. For weeks, the truck has made its rounds with an eerie regularity, circling the building like a predatory creature. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a random occurrence. But the constant noise, combined with the sense of being watched, became too unnerving to ignore. Last week, I decided I could no longer tolerate the fear and uncertainty. I resolved to confront the driver and get some answers. As midnight approached, I watched from my window, waiting for the truck to make its nightly appearance. When the familiar rumble began, I braced myself and headed outside. The truck was parked in its usual spot, the engine idling with a low, almost menacing hum. I approached it cautiously, the fog of my breath mixing with the misty night air. The driver's side window was rolled down just enough for me to see inside. I could make out the shadowy figure behind the wheel, but the interior was shrouded in darkness. With a deep breath, I knocked on the window. The driver slowly turned his head toward me. The dim light from the street lamp barely illuminated his face, but his eyes, hollow and emotionless, were unmistakable. He stared at me with a vacant intensity that made my skin crawl. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor of fear. "Why won't you stop? What do you want?" The driver's gaze remained fixed on me. There was something profoundly disturbing about the way he looked, as if he were seeing through me rather than actually looking at me. He took a moment before responding, and when he did, his voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to cut through the night air. "You're not supposed to see me." His words echoed in my mind, the implication sending a jolt of terror through me. What did he mean by that? Why wasn't I supposed to see him? I felt a surge of panic and confusion. What does that mean? I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why are you here every night? What do you want from me?" The driver didn't respond. Instead, he simply continued to stare at me with those hollow eyes. The silence stretched, the only sound the persistent rumble of the engine. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of impending dread. I took a step back, feeling an icy chill settle over me. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just tell me what's going on." But the driver remained silent, his gaze unchanging. After a long, tense moment, he rolled up the window, cutting off any chance of further conversation. The truck's engine roared to life, and the vehicle began its circuit once more, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Shaken, I returned to my apartment, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The driver's cryptic words, "You're not supposed to see me," left me with an unnerving sense of foreboding. What was he hiding, and why was my seeing him so significant? The days that followed were marked by an escalating sense of paranoia. The truck continued its nightly patrol, and the sound of its engine became a constant reminder of the encounter. I began to notice strange occurrences around my apartment, objects slightly out of place, faint but unidentifiable noises, and an ever-present feeling of being watched. One night, I awoke to find my front door slightly ajar. The truck was parked outside, as usual, but now there was a new note taped to the door. My heart pounded as I retrieved it, the note bearing the same unsettling red ink. It read, "You shouldn't have seen me." The message sent a fresh wave of terror through me. The notion that I had somehow breached a boundary I wasn't supposed to cross filled me with dread. The truck's presence, once a mere annoyance, had now become a direct threat. Determined to understand what was happening, I began to investigate the history of the truck and its driver. I spoke to neighbors and checked local records, but I found nothing that could explain the driver's behavior or the purpose of the truck's nightly rounds. It was as if the driver and the truck existed in a void, disconnected from any logical explanation. The fear intensified with each passing night. I started to question my own sanity, wondering if I was imagining the whole thing. The driver's warning that I wasn't supposed to see him seemed to suggest a hidden, perhaps dangerous reality that I had inadvertently uncovered. One particularly sleepless night, I heard a series of loud knocks at my door. My heart raced as I approached, only to find it was another note, this one more ominous than the last. It read, "The truth is closer than you think." The words left me in a state of terror and confusion. What truth was the driver referring to, and what did it mean for me? I felt trapped in a nightmarish scenario with no clear way out. The truck's nightly visits had become a constant, looming threat, and the driver's cryptic messages only deepened the mystery. As the truck continued its relentless circuit, my life became a series of anxious, sleepless nights and paranoid days. The once familiar routine of my existence was now overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. Each night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the truck's engine rumbling outside, a constant reminder of the horrifying reality I was forced to confront. The truck's presence had turned my world into a dark, foreboding place. The driver's words and the unsettling occurrences around my apartment left me with a growing sense of dread. I was left to grapple with the terrifying possibility that the driver's warning was more than just a cryptic statement. It might be a harbinger of something far more sinister, a reality I was now inescapably entangled with.